go ahead and get started then. Survive and thrive at public speaking. All right, I'd like to take a little poll here to see exactly why you chose to spend your final session here. How many of you consider yourselves pretty effective public speakers and you want to improve your art? All right. How many of you are absolutely terrified of public speeches and you want to figure out how not to be terrified anymore? How many of you here are because your mom or wife made you? Thank you for your honesty, Dad. I'd like to open up with a story. There was once a young man, many years ago, who was in part of a church Bible study. They were talking about God helping us overcome our fears. And the man who was presenting it said, "I used to be afraid of public speaking. Now look at me." Now the young man very distinctly remembers thinking, "I will never learn to speak publicly." Now the young man grew up and his opinions changed. In fact, he became an effective public speaker, doing several events that involved public presentation. And now he's the one that gets to say, "I used to be afraid of public speaking. Now look at me." Now, as you might have realized, that young man was me. My name is James Ware. I took 2 years of public speaking class through Central Illinois Boring and Defenders. To this day, I say that it's the most important class that I was ever forced to take. Since then, I've had more public speaking training through my co-op, Peoria Cooperative Academy, and I've been hired for 4 separate presentations, reenacting presentations that have required me to use my public speaking skills. So I'm speaking to you today not as someone who was always good at public speaking, someone who always enjoyed it, was enthralled by the idea of speaking to an audience, but someone who is terrified at the thought of getting up and talking. I want to give you tools today that are going to help you in your future public speeches. Now, there are a few specific things I want you to take away from this speech. I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, but there are a few things that I want you to remember. Now, the first thing I want you to remember is this. Public speaking is an art, not a science. There is no y = mx + b when you plug in your speech and it comes out as this brilliant, fluent, well-articulated speech that's going to change the hearts of millions. It's an art. It requires practice and it requires perseverance in order to get good at it. Now, let's take a look at the map of where we're going to go. First of all, we're going to be looking at the importance of public speaking. Why should we speak publicly anyway? Why do we care? Secondly, we're going to be looking at the basics of public speaking. We're going to be looking at types of speeches, lies about public speaking, basic skills, and overcoming nerves. That fourth one is the biggest thing. Speaking honestly, I'm terrified right now. I'm extremely nervous, but that happens. It is a part of public speaking that every speaker has to face. Finally, we're going to be looking at tips from experts. I have a few friends who I've had the pleasure of coming into contact with who you might recognize some of their names from the homeschool community. And then in bringing it home, I'm going to walk you through some of the steps it takes to put together a speech. Now, before we get into public speaking, we need to define exactly what we're talking about. Now, you know how in the film Inception, the main character, Cobb, spends a good time in the film doing things that he told other people not to do? Quoting this particular source made me feel like that. Now, before I give you the source, let me tell you that I dug long and hard on the internet trying to find a definition of public speaking that I agreed with. When I found this particular definition, it was on a site. And when I saw what that site had cited as its source, I had to think long and hard about whether I really wanted to use it. But before I reveal my source, let me give you the definition. Now, if you're taking notes, don't write this down. I'm going to simplify it in a minute. Public speaking is speaking to a group of people in a structured, deliberate manner intended to inform, influence, or entertain listeners. The purpose of public speaking can range from simply transmitting information to motivating people to act, to simply telling a story. A good orator should be able to change the emotions of the listener, not just inform them. Now, the source of this definition is Wikipedia. It was very hard to cite that. Now, the simplified version of this is, public speaking is verbal communication to a group of people intended to resonate with their emotions. That's my paraphrase. Now, why should we care about public speaking? Why should we speak publicly? First of all, I'm going to look at this from a biblical perspective. You're all familiar with this portion of Scripture. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Let's take a close look at one of the words used in this. The Greek word translated as preach is kerusos, or to herald. Now, who was a herald? Anyone. What did a herald do? What's that? Proclaim. Yeah. Emily?
Yes.
I found out one of the best ways of getting an audience's attention is to offer them food. So anyone who participates is going to get a chocolate egg, providing I don't run out. A herald was someone who went before a noble or official, proclaiming that they were coming. Our job on this earth is to go in the world and tell people Jesus Christ is coming. Prepare for his arrival. As you might have already figured, this requires a good deal of public speaking. Now, God didn't always choose people as his public speakers who were naturally adept at it. I don't have time to go into these examples. I wish I did. But if you look at the books of Jeremiah and Exodus, you'll see that both Moses and Jeremiah were terrified to speak publicly. In fact, Moses made excuses and Jeremiah said he was a babe. But God used them anyway to powerfully influence the world. You don't have to be naturally adept at public speaking to be used by God to change the world. Now, let's look at another instance of when you'll need public speaking in the workforce. Whether it's talking in a meeting or interacting with clients, any job is going to require a degree of public speaking ability. God requires public speaking, and jobs require public speaking. It is a vital skill today, and even if we don't enjoy it, we have to have a degree. We have to have a degree of understanding in how to put together public speeches. Now, let's play a little game. I'm calling this Name That Speech. There have been several speeches throughout history that have changed the way that we look at the world. Now, I asked this before everyone was here, but what was interesting is on many of the lists I looked at of important speeches, the Sermon on the Mount got in the first 2 or 3, even on secular lists. I was amazed that even secular people recognize the importance of that speech. Now, I'm going to read you an excerpt from a famous speech. These speeches come from either an actual event or a couple of them come from literature. I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. Now, I'm going to see if any of you can guess who the speaker was and roughly what the event was. I'm not going to be real picky about that, all right? I am not inclined within the pale of this glorious event. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings is with you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed to your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminous temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were an inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Whose powerful words were those? Yes. Correct. Yes. Actually, it was Frederick Douglass. It was close, though. Sorry, I mixed up my own speeches. It was the 4th of July celebration in 1852 in Rochester, New York. He was asked to come speak on the importance of the 4th of July. He used it as an opportunity to bring attention to the plight of the slaves. It's a powerful piece of public speaking. Now, this one you should all get. This is very well known. I believe that this nation should commit itself to advancing the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space. And none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. JFK. Oh, I was close to that. I was close to that. This is why I'm talking about public speaking, not eye-hand coordination. Our tragedy today is a general and universal fear, so long sustained by now that we can even bear it. There are no longer problems of the spirit. There is only the question, when will I be blown up? Because of this, the young man or woman writing today has forgotten the problems of the human heart, in conflict with itself, which alone can make good writing, because only that is worth writing about, worth the agony and the sweat. That one was a bit, I wasn't familiar with this when I looked it up, but it was truly an incredible speech. This speech only lasted, I want to say, about 5 minutes. Shakespeare once said, brevity is the soul of wit. In other words, the shorter you say something, the more people remember it. You want in your speeches, if you can say something in a short, pithy statement, say it. Because you want people to remember those short excerpts.
He's got a guess.
Oh, yeah.
President Nixon?
Not President Nixon. It was William Faulkner. He was the Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1949. He was desperately concerned about the catastrophes that the nuclear age brought about. He believed that it was ending literature as we knew it. It was a wake-up call that we had to end the fear of the Cold War in order for literature to survive. It was an incredible speech. This one, I know you really should know. This is as important as the Kennedy one. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were be subjected and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and liberation of the old. Yes.
James, there's somebody on this side.
I don't know who rose their hand first. I had my yes.
I thought it was Napoleon.
What?
Was it Napoleon?
It was not Napoleon.
Yeah.
Isaac?
Winston Churchill?
Winston Churchill. Yes. Don't know if I can make this. Oh,
Yes, nice.
that was Winston Churchill's address. It was shortly after the fall of France, when England was the last vestige of freedom fighting the Nazis. He gave a series of 3 speeches which were intended to inspire his country to keep fighting. This was a very important speech in the history of World War II. And what's interesting, I listened to a recording of him delivering this. He didn't deliver it like I did. He delivered it in a very matter-of-fact, quiet, British manner. Very dignified, very matter-of-fact, very sure of himself. Not at all like we Americans deliver speeches. All right. 3 millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty, and in such a country as which we possess, are invincible by any force which our enemy can send against us. Besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who provides over the destinies of nations, and who will rise up friends to fight our battles for us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the valiant, the active, the brave. Besides, sir, we have no election. If we were base enough to deserve it, it is now too late to retire from the contest. There is no retreat but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come. Yes, sir? What? No. You might be familiar with the closing words. Give me liberty or give me death. I think you raised your hand first. Correct. It's amazing how some of these speeches, we might not recognize the opening lines or in the middle, but the ending words will live in infamy. Now this is one of the ones, I have others, but I think I'm going to wait on those if we have some time at the end. This one is the one I was most excited about delivering. This story shall a good man teach his son, and Crispin shall ne'er go by. from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed that they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks that fought upon St. Crispin's day. Yes?
Theodore Roosevelt?
What?
Theodore Roosevelt?
No?
Henry V. at Edinburgh. I don't know what I don't know.
Okay. Yep, that was Henry V. Okay, that one was from literature. It wasn't technically spoken, but that speech has been imitated so many times, and I really like it, and I'm the one giving the speech. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of speeches, the basics. These are a few tips that you will use during public speaking. These are ones that have changed the way I speak publicly, and have really helped me. I'm not speaking just on public speaking, I'm speaking from personal experience here. There are 5 types of speeches you need to be aware of. Now, other places are going to give you different lists of type of speeches. These are the ones that I learned. There are other lists and other names for them. Informative speech. These are your basic speech where you're giving information to someone. You're informing them about a subject. Expository. These are a lot like informative speeches, except that you are demonstrating a project or exposing something. It's like an informative speech, only you get to use a visual aid. For instance, this speech would be considered an expository speech because I'm getting to use a PowerPoint. Persuasive. In this speech, you are trying to persuade someone of a position. You're trying to persuade them that abortion is wrong. You're trying to persuade them to buy a Labradoodle. Dramatic. These are really the most fun speeches. These are the ones where you get to put your dramatic flair into it. The quotes that I just read, had that been my entire speech, this would have been a dramatic speech. You get to give a portion of a play, a portion of a book, a portion of a comic book. I'll be telling a little bit about one of my experiences doing a dramatic speech a little bit later. And finally, impromptu. I can stand every type of public speaking except impromptu. In impromptu, you are given a slip of paper with a word on it. You are given 5 minutes, or 5 minutes is what I'm using. I'm not sure exactly what the regulation time is. To take that slip of paper, jot down some notes on what you can talk about it, get up, and present a speech. I'm not good at coming up with things on the fly. I've been thinking about this speech since last year at this time, if that gives you an example. At times, we probably will all be called upon to speak publicly when we've not prepared anything, so it's good practice. It's just not one that I particularly enjoy. All right, public speaking lies. There are a lot of lies that are associated with public speaking. These things are absolutely erroneous. It doesn't matter. Public speaking does matter. Public speaking has changed the world. You've seen during these few speeches how these speeches have inspired nations to keep fighting. They've brought attention to horrible atrocities that have been going on. Public speaking is important. It's a very important skill to keep alive and keep active. You can give a perfect speech. Let me tell you, in all the speeches I've given, I have never given a perfect speech. Do not strive for perfection in your speeches. Remember, public speaking is an art, not a science. There is no formula, so your speeches will never be 100% perfect. Don't strive for perfection. Strive for excellence. Strive to make the speech as good as you can make it no matter what level you're at or no matter how much experience you have. Do not strive for perfection. Strive for excellence. You need to be an extrovert. All right, I'm just take a little poll of the audience here. How many of you think that I'm an extrovert? How many of you think that I'm an introvert? You would be right. I'm an introvert. I have a very small circle of friends. My idea of a night of partying is sitting at home with a good book. I'm an introvert. I can speak publicly because of a few ways that I've learned to do it. Public speaking requires you to get out of sight of yourself, and it can be exhausting to an introvert, but it's still worth it. It is still worth the effort. The nerves should go away. No, they don't. Nerves will never go away. They stay present with you no matter what you're speaking on. I've met a couple of public speakers who say that they don't get nervous anymore. Frankly, I don't believe them. In fact, it was Mark Twain who said there are two types of public speakers, the nervous and the liars. Basic skills. These are a few tips that have really, really helped the way that I speak. The 3-second rule. Now, I didn't do this at the beginning of my speech because of the type of speech it is. If you're giving a shorter speech, the 3-second rule is essentially this. You fold your hands, you look down, occasionally you close your eyes, and you wait 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then you begin your speech. It stops you from starting your speech as you're walking up to the front of the room, and it lets your audience know when you're starting. Then at the end of your speech, you do the same thing. You close your eyes, fold your hand, and count to 3. It lets them know when it's over. It lets them know when you're completed and you've said everything that you want to say. Avoid fidgeting. This is really, really hard. Fidgeting, we all have a tendency to mess with things when we're in nervous situations. We play with our hair if you happen to be a girl. It's a bit hard for me. You mess with what's your pocket. You move back and forth. Try to avoid that as much as possible because it takes away from your speech. Because if I'm sitting up here and I'm doing this, what's the one thing you're wondering? What's that? I've already given you enough candy. The speaker's square. Now this, I use this, it depends on what kind of speech you're giving, but the speaker's square is essentially this. You step to the left, you talk. When you're moving on to a new point, you step forward, step to the left, step back. You walk in a square as you're talking. Now you don't do it quickly because that just looks ridiculous. You do it slowly, and when you're moving from a point, you indicate that you're moving to it by stepping. It keeps you from standing still because, frankly, when I stand still, I start shaking. So I tend to move around a little bit while I'm talking. Some people tend to pace the room and walk all over. That depends on what your style of speaking is. And in some instances, if you're behind a podium, you can't really move around. So it depends on the type of speech, but the speaker's square can be really helpful. Gestures. This is what keeps you from fidgeting. If you have something to do with your hand, it keeps you from messing with other things. When I speak, I gesture a lot, which you probably have already noticed. In fact, I learned this when I was public speaking. It's become such a part of how I talk that even when I'm not public speaking, I tend to gesture a lot. Yes, Daniel?
Is there a limit to how much you can gesture?
Well, you don't want to look ridiculous. Make the gestures count. They have to have something to do with your speech. Try to demonstrate what you're doing. Either types of gestures, you can gesture demonstrating how large something is, like blocks with so by so by so, or you can just gesture to add emphasis. It really depends. The point is, if it's distracting, don't do it too much. Do it enough that doesn't take away from your speech. This is a rule of thumb. It can be hard to gauge at times how much gesturing is too much gesturing. Share information. This is the key to speaking effectively. When I'm sitting up here talking to you right now, I'm not thinking of this as a speech. I am sharing what I know with you. I'm not sharing to a group of homeschoolers. I'm sharing with you individually, and you individually, and you individually. I'm sharing to a group of individuals. That's also why I make eye contact, because it helps me to remember that I'm not speaking to a bunch of people, I'm speaking to a group of individuals. Don't think of it as a presentation. Think of it as sharing information. If I were to ask you what you're passionate about, if your passion is Rubik's Cubes, and I asked you to tell me about them, you'd be able to tell me a good deal. But if I asked you to get up here and give a speech on Rubik's Cubes, you'd be more nervous. Think of it as an opportunity to share information, not as a public presentation. A couple of other things, I didn't put them in my notes. Work on eye contact. It makes your audience feel connected to you. It makes you feel like you're not just talking to an empty room, you're actually talking to a bunch of people. And project your voice. Talk to the people in the back of the room. If I was just talking to people in the front row, I wouldn't be talking this loud. But you want to make sure your voice fills the room, or if you're using a sound system, it's a little different. It again depends on the type of speech. The most important tip that I can give is this: practice. Practice, 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 practice. And if you don't do anything else, practice. Practice leads to excellence. The more you practice public speaking, the more comfortable you are with it. Practice for your friends. Practice for your family. Practice for your enemies. Practice in front of a camcorder. Practice in front of a mirror, over a tape deck. Practice in the shower, while you're walking. Anytime you have an opportunity to practice, take advantage of it. Because practice is what makes you comfortable with your material, so you can think of it as sharing information. Now we're going to move on here to nerves. Every public speaker has to deal with nerves. It's the nature of speaking publicly. They will not go away. They stay with you, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Nervous energy, like anything else, is energy. It gives you the drive to speak well. It can be really hard to harness that energy, but there are a few things that help overcome nerves. First of all, nerves will never go away. If you remember nothing else from this speech, remember this point. It's okay to be nervous. Don't think that you're failing in a speech just because you're nervous. A couple of things that help me: focus on your audience. Forget yourself. And I'll come back to this a little later. Focus on your audience. Remember that a speaker without an audience is nothing. Me, if you were here, I'd be up here talking to an empty room, and that's just creepy. Remember to focus on your audience. Use pauses. A well-timed pause can change your speech. In fact, Mark Twain said, "The right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause." It's okay to pause. Use it for emphasis. Gestures. I already addressed this. Gestures help relieve nerves because you're actually moving. Don't stand like this when you're trying to public speak. You will go insane. Finally, or not finally quite yet, pray. I'm not trying to be overly spiritual or be overly Christian with this, but seriously, praying helps. This is something I do before any time I'm public speaking. I pray, and I use these exact words. Lord, give me the words you want me to say. Help me to connect with my audience. Take my nerves. I don't want them. Finally, have fun. You're getting an opportunity to share your passion, what you've researched and put together a presentation about with a whole group of people. Have fun with it. Enjoy your subject. Enjoy your opportunity to connect with an audience. We're going to do a little game here. Something that is important about public speaking is what words you emphasize. And I want to show this by using the phrase, "Is that your sandwich?" Now, I need 4 volunteers from the audience. All right, you, and you.
And you point to me or her?
I'm pointing to you.
Okay, please.
All right. Now I'm going to give you these cards. And on each of them is the phrase, "Is this your sandwich?" And I want, where'd my 4th volunteer go? Go ahead. I want you to emphasize the underlined word. Put the emphasis to your sentence on that word. All right. Go ahead. Yeah, you.
Is that your sandwich?
What does that make you think of?
That is really disgusting.
Is that really your sandwich? I wouldn't eat that. All right.
Is that your sandwich?
Is that your sandwich, or is that Fred's sandwich?
Is that your sandwich?
I can't tell if it's a sandwich or not.
Is that your sandwich?
Is that really your sandwich? Are you sure that wasn't my sandwich that accidentally walked off my plate? And in large families, that does happen. Thank you. Emphasis is important. Pay attention to what words you emphasize. I once saw a chart that said it was breaking down your communication. 25% of what you communicate is what words you use. 25% is how you say them. 50% is your body language. That's why gesturing and avoiding fidgeting is so important to public speaking. Because that's a full half of what your audience is tuning in on. If you're gesturing, if you're making lots of movements, people see that you're excited about what you're talking about. Now, how many of you are familiar with this guy? All right, if you're not familiar with him, this is Josh Taylor. He is one of the co-creators of the YouTube channel Blimey Cal. I have the pleasure of being friends with him on Facebook, and he recently did a public presentation. So I messaged him and said, Josh, I'm doing a speech on public speaking. Can you give me some tips to share with your audience? And he was kind enough to answer and give me some tips. Be as prepared as you can be. This goes right along with practicing. You'll notice that all three of my people all mention this. It's very important. Secondly, have stories that you are very comfortable with telling and work them into your presentation. That way, even if you get nervous, you can tell stories that you know really well. You'll notice how I opened up my speech. I opened it up with a story about me. That was to get you connected. That was to get you excited and interested in what I was saying. Stories show that you personally understand what you're talking about. That these aren't just hypothetical ideas. These are things that actually happen in real life. Now, my second person, which I roped into giving me information, was Dr. J. Watt, author of the Exploring Creation series from APACHE, and he's now wrote another science curriculum for younger grades, I believe. Relax. If you stand in front of people nervous, it makes them ill at ease as well. Try as hard as you can to stand up there like it's no big deal. That puts the audience at ease. Part of effective public speaking is acting like you're not nervous. If you can act like you're not nervous, people will usually believe you. If you sound like you know what you're talking about, people will usually believe you. Don't try to cover too much. It's better to finish early than rush through a presentation in order to fit it into the time allotted. This is something that I personally struggle with. I try to fit way too much in my speeches. I'm always having to cut to make them fit inside the time. It happened with this speech. It's happened, I think, with just about every speech I've given. Now, my final person who gave the best tips, I couldn't put them all on the screen because it was just too much text, but I'm going to read them as she wrote them, was Diana Ware, who wrote the history curriculum that's published through Answers in Genesis. The name is escaping me, excuse me. 1, speak on something you know. Just as a writer is admonished, write what you know, so a speaker will be much more successful when speaking on something that is very familiar to him or her. Now, this is Mrs. Waring's words, not mine that I'm reading, by the way. Remember that what you're speaking on, you need to know a good deal about. This is when research comes into play. Because, let's face it, sometimes we're given speeches on subjects that we really don't care about. I mean, do we really all care about giving a presentation on spider monkeys? I mean, some of you might be very excited to give a presentation on spider monkeys. I wouldn't be nearly as excited, but you want to do enough research that you get excited about your subject. Make sure that you are actually really excited about spider monkeys and you care about preserving their rainforest environment. Prepare what you want to communicate. Prepare the overall structure of what you communicate. What is the topic? What are you speaking on? Why are you speaking on it? What do you want the audience to learn or experience? What single most important point do you want them to remember when they walk out the door? Write out the answers to these questions. Simplify, simplify, simplify until there is no more than 3 to 5 points that are easily articulated. You want to have a few simple points that your audience is going to be able to understand and digest. It's not good to cover a wide variety of things if your audience isn't going to understand any of it. If they walk out and go, wow, he sure talked about a lot. I wonder what it was. That's not good. Consider visuals. Consider the visuals and handouts that could help an audience understand and really remember your presentation. Create visually interesting PowerPoint slides for each of the 3 to 5 points for number 2. If PowerPoint is not available, create posters or other large visuals to help make your point memorable. Visuals are important. Remember that your audience is going to be made up of visual, auditory, and tactile learners. Visual learners learn from visuals. If you're a visual learner, you're mostly going to remember what's on the PowerPoint. If you're an auditory learner, you're going to remember what I'm saying. If you're a kinetic learner, you're probably doing something with your hands to make sure that you're focused on what I'm saying. Practice. You'll notice that this has showed up 3 times now. It is very important. Practice your presentation. Put each of the 3 to 5 points on 3x5 card with short notes or outline of what you want to say about that point. And then practice. After you feel comfortable with that, practice giving the 3 to 5 points without the 3x5 cards. When you do your presentation, have the cards with you in case you need them. This is one of the things that I do. When I'm giving a speech, first of all, I do research. I outline my speech. Now, if you don't like outlines, do the bubble charts or do whatever you need to do in order to understand what you're going to be talking about. Have it organized in some portion. A good tip, which you use in writing as well as speaking, is tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you just told them. Give an outline, give your points, give a summary. Because you want to address that 3 times so it sticks in their mind. Advertising tells us that you have to see an ad 7 times in order to remember it. Your speech should be similar. Use repetition. But don't be so repetitive that it gets really annoying. Don't be so repetitive that it gets really annoying. Don't be so repetitive that it gets really annoying.
That's annoying.
Thank you, Dad. When it comes to note cards, you want to practice with them, but then weed yourself off them. If you have a lot of note card, I would recommend practice it with that detailed note card, then write new note cards that are simplified. Practice with those, then practice without any note cards. Your note cards are important to give you a cue as to what's going on in the speech, but you don't want to be so tied down to them that you're reading off of them, because that's really, really boring. Forget about yourself. This is one of the best tips that I got from her. When you make your presentation, forget about yourself. Forget about yourself. Think about your audience. Focus on them. Pretend you are trying to communicate these 3 to 5 points with each individual rather than a large crowd. Look at them in the eye. Smile. Relax. You're doing great. Eye contact. Communicating information. Thinking about your audience. These things are key to public speaking. Finally, be comfortable. The more comfortable you are on stage, the more comfortable your audience will be. It is really helpful to remember that. If you are scared stiff, focusing on your fears. If you are scared still, focusing on your fears, presumably that's not good. Your audience will be uncomfortable. If you're focusing on your fears instead of what you're saying and your audience is going to pick up on that. Audiences are incredibly perceptive as to what's going on with the speaker. You want to make sure that you're focused on your information, you're focused on the audience, not your nerves. Your nerves will be there. Your nerves will be, at times, daunting. Avoid focusing on them, which can be very hard, but that's where practicing comes in. It really does help. All right, bringing it home. This is where I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what presenting a speech is like. What do I do when I'm giving a speech? Now, when it comes to preparation, you're giving your subject, do your research, figure out your main points. After that, now what? Where do you go from here? You have information you want to share. How do you transmit that from a page of paper onto a PowerPoint presentation giving a speech? Note cards. Note cards are very, very important, very, very helpful. Let me give you a look at what one of my note cards looks like. First of all, number your note cards. If you're giving a speech with note cards, what happens when you walk up with all your note cards and then plop, drop them on the ground? Now, these didn't fly nearly as far as I expected. But if you have a lot of note cards, they're going to go everywhere, and you don't want to be sitting up there trying to reshuffle your note cards, putting them in the right order. Because first of all, that's going to make you more nervous, and it's going to communicate to the judges that you're not prepared. Number them. So if they do get out of order, you can put them back in order very quickly. Put the speech title at the top. Especially if you're working on multiple presentations that involve note cards or multiple things that involve note cards, you want to make sure you remember what this is for. Also, they're fun to look back on. If you save your note cards and you know what they're for, you can thumb through them and go, oh, I remember that speech. Use bullet points. Do not put full sentences unless it's something very important that you want to remember to say. Use bullet points. Just, let's say that I was talking on the American Revolution. I might put George Washington, the Continental Congress, reasons for breaking off relations with England. Those would be my bullet points. And I would remember based on those bullet points what I was saying. You want your bullet points to be mental hooks. You might use words that you want to use in your sentences so that you'll see that word and you'll see Declaration and go, oh yeah, Declaration of Independence. That's what I was talking on next. You want your note cards to be a tool, so when you're up here speaking, you're not reading off of them, but when you forget where you're going, you can glance down and they will remind you. In this presentation, I'm not using note cards, but what I do have is an outline on my notebook. This is what I'm using to let me know where I'm going. It's very helpful. Use big red letters to write on it something you might forget. If you think that you're going to forget a point, mark it big and bold so that it will catch your eye. No one except you is going to use your note cards. It doesn't matter what they look like or how messy they are. It's so you can use them. And finally, remember to look up. Nobody likes to listen to a speaker who's just staring at note cards. You have to remember to look up from your note cards. And what point would really help with looking up from your note cards? Practice. I hate to keep coming back to that, but it's really the main thing that helps with speeches. Weeding it down. This is never fun. It's never fun when you get all your points together and you have a 3 to 5 minute speech and you practice it and it comes out to 10 minutes. You have two options. One, you can call the teacher in a blind panic and say, "Teacher, can I please have all the extra minutes at the end?" I have done that before. I'm sorry to admit. You have to weed it down so that it's doable within the time frame for the most part. Unless it's an event where you can't ask for extra time. In some class projects, I would say it's appropriate to do that, but for the most part, be aware of how much time you're using. So any unnecessary points, little tidbits that don't really fit with your speech, take those out. Focus on your 3 to 5 main points that Mrs. Ware talked about. Practice, practice, practice. I don't think I need to go over that anymore. The day of the speech. This is the hardest day for a public speaker. You get up in the morning and you remember, I have a speech today. This is terrifying. Why did I sign up for this? Get a good night's sleep. This is important. You don't want to be tired when you're trying to public speak. Get a good night's sleep the night before. Don't obsess. I am the #1 violator of this rule. You don't want to, the whole day, you don't want to be thinking about, I have a speech, what am I going to say? Let's rehearse it mentally. No matter what I'm doing, I'm going to be rehearsing mentally all day. I would recommend the day of the speech, go over it 1-2 times maximum. Don't go over it so many times. If you've already practiced it enough, you don't need that prep. If you keep practicing it over and over again, you're going to lose the ability to have fun during the speech. You're going to have worked yourself up to it in such a blind panic. I've done this before. It's not fun. Don't obsess. Pray. Again, prayer really, really helps. Make sure to pray. Ask God for a calm mind. Ask Him to help you to focus on the audience and give the information that He wants you to give during the speech. Equally hard. Now I didn't have it up on my PowerPoint, but I find the hardest part of speech is about the first 1 to 2 minutes. That's when your nervousness is at the peak and you go, I don't remember what I'm supposed to say. That's when it's really good on your note card to have the first 2 or 3 words you're supposed to say. Have it on the note card so you can look down and go, I got that first line. I got this. I can do this. Once you're done with that first 1 to 2 minutes, you calm yourself down and you connect it with your audience. That's the time where you get to throw everything into it and make a connection with your audience. Work on those first 1 to 2 minutes because that's when your audience makes the decision, is this a boring public speaker or is this a public speaker I can listen to? You don't want the former. Connect with the audience. Work at connecting with the audience. Speak to them. Make eye contact. Project your voice. Make sure that you connect with them on a real level. Have fun. Public speaking can be fun once you get used to it. Now, I know that many of you are not believing this right now. Please trust me, I used to be terrified of it. I know what it's like to be mortally, absolutely terrified of speaking publicly. It can be overcome. What if something goes wrong? What if something goes wrong? You have 2 options. Either you can run out of the room in tears because your speech got messed up. That's not a good choice. Or you can go with the flow. You have to learn to think on your feet. What happens if you miss a point? If it's an important point, figure out how to wrap back around to it. If it's not such an important point, let go. Your audience has not heard your speech before, so if you mess up something, they don't know you've messed it up. I'm certain that I've already, during this speech, done things that I have not practiced when I ran through the speech in my mind. Did you notice? Did you notice that I was going off of my outline? Probably not. A few of you might have been really perceptive. But your audience doesn't know what you're talking about. They don't know what your speech is going to sound like. Remember that you know the most about your speech of any of your audience. Even if there's someone in your audience who may know more about spider monkeys than you, don't focus on that. Remember, I've done the research on this. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I want to share, and I can do this well. If you've practiced enough, if you have gotten your material down enough, you are the expert in the room. Remember that. Walk up there as if you know exactly what you're going to talk about. Finally, I've addressed preparing for a speech, I've addressed giving a speech. There's one thing I have not addressed yet. Criticism. Let's face it, nobody likes receiving criticism. It's not fun. You don't like hearing, well, you stuttered during point 3, and I thought you were a little rambling during the entire thing. And in fact, you weren't talking loud enough. Overall, I didn't really understand what you were trying to say. That's not fun. That's not fun at all. And it's okay if you feel upset initially. But you've got to remember a couple of things. First of all, consider the source. If it's some person who is sitting in the back row, who doesn't know about public speaking, who is just, I don't know, a random person who walked in off the street, is their feedback very important to you? No. If it's the judge, if it's your teacher, if it's a classmate who knows about public speaking and knows you and cares about you personally, then you should pay attention. There are times to pay attention to and there are times not to. If it's a random person, don't pay attention. If it's someone who knows the subject, they know you, and they know what you should be sounding like, that's the criticism to pay attention to. Consider its validity. This is hard. You want to think, I gave it my best foot forward, this was the best speech that I could possibly give, there is no way this speech could be given better by anyone on the planet Earth. I've been there. That's the feeling at the end of a speech. But consider its validity. Perhaps you really were rambling. Perhaps you really weren't speaking up well enough. Perhaps you really did stutter. Perhaps it really was not clear what you were trying to say. Consider its validity. Pray about it. Seek God. Say, God, is this something I should pay attention to? Talk to your parents. Talk to your teacher. Talk to your classmates. Ask them, is this something that you notice too? Is this really an important piece of criticism? Use negative criticism to improve future speeches. Pay attention to the feedback, maybe even make notes on it. And if you feel that it is valid, if you feel that it's from an important source, incorporate it into your next speech. The wonderful thing about public speaking is there are always opportunities to do more speeches. You will always have an opportunity to improve what you're trying to say. Now before I get to that, I want to share a little story. These points about criticism, I didn't know when I started public speaking. One event changed the entire way I look at criticism. This is a speech evaluation from 2009, when I was in SIBAT, Central Illinois Born-Again Defenders. I was giving a duo-dramatic speech with someone who may or may not be in the audience. This was the first piece of really negative criticism I received. Up until that point, all the homeschool moms that were giving the speech said, "You're doing great, this is a wonderful speech, you're doing an incredible job." So when I got to the speech competition, I was thinking, this is an incredible speech, I'm doing a great job, this is going to be incredible. And then I got this. It's on a scale of 1 to 5 points. Content selection, 3. Content analysis, 3. Vocal delivery, 4. Physical delivery, 4. Overall presentation, 3. It was clear that you both knew the story you were speaking, but I'm not sure it translated to your audience. You both have potential to be great communicators. You work well together. That hurt. It hurt to know that someone didn't understand my speech, and that someone was being critical of me. I went home devastated after I'd seen that critique. I sat down and I thought, this isn't fair. I did a good job. Everyone else had been saying I do a good job. This is not fair. This judge doesn't know what he's talking about. And my mother, who is a very good public speaker, gave me one of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard. She said, son, you have 2 options. 1, you can let this go to your heart. You can let yourself consider that he was criticizing you personally. You can let it eat you up and destroy you. 2, you can consider its validity and improve your future speeches. I chose the second option. I consider its validity, and it was hard. It took me a long time to get to a point. It took me several days to get to a point where I thought, you know what? Maybe I really didn't communicate my story. Maybe they really didn't know what I was talking about. Maybe a Spider-Man comic book wasn't the best selection for a dramatic speech. Seriously, that really was what we were doing our speech on. Okay, real quick pointer, never try adapting a PowerPoint as a comic book as a dramatic speech. It doesn't work, okay? Learn from my mistakes. But I learned to accept criticism. It's not easy, it's not fun, but it's something you're gonna have to do. You have to learn in public speaking to be open to other criticism of what you're saying. Now, what should you remember? I've given you a lot of pointers. I've given you a lot of information. Most of you are probably overwhelmed right now. This is what I want you to remember. If you don't remember anything else, remember these points. Public speaking has changed the world. Public speaking has changed the world as we know it. Powerful speeches have made an impact on humanity. 2, even introverts can be effective speakers. You do not have to be an extrovert to be able to speak well. 3, practice leads to excellence. Practice does not make perfect, but it allows you to come to a point of excellence where you know, I did the best job I could. I am an excellent public speaker. 4, nerves are natural. Don't fear the nerves. Know that they will come, know that they will be there, but don't allow your own nerves to define the quality of your speech. Know that they can be overcome, but they may not go away. Even the most effective public speakers get nervous sometimes. It's a natural part of putting yourself out there and presenting to an audience. Don't fear them. Public speaking is an art, not a science. There is no formula you can plug in. There is no perfect way of telling a speech. It's an art. It is a learned skill. Practice it and you can become a good public speaker, but it requires practice and it requires work. Finally, you can be an effective public speaker. I stand up here today as someone who never thought that I would be doing this. Honestly, if you told me good 6-7 years ago that I would be presenting at the APACHE convention, the largest homeschool convention in downstate Illinois, I would have laughed. I would have thought, I can never do that. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not a professional. I don't have anything to say. I'm not good at this. I don't want to do this. And yet here I am. In fact, when I got good at public speaking, one of my personal goals was, I want to speak at APACHE. Because it was at this convention that I saw truly effective public speakers. I saw the type of speeches that can change how people look at things. So today, this is a dream come true for me. The opportunity to speak at APACHE. When you get good at public speaking, or even if where you are, define your goals. Define where you want to be. What do you want to do with this skill? Where do you want to go? It might not be APACHE. It might be something entirely different, but know what you're shooting for. Now I have an entirely new set of goals since I've spoken at APACHE. I have an ending quote here. Between your brain and your mouth, or your fingers, is magic. Your power to choose what you say next. Use that magic. A truly good speech is magical. It changes people. It changes their hearts and their minds. And what message is more important to us than speaking to a world that Jesus Christ is coming, that he offers salvation and that they need to get themselves right with him before his return? There is no more important subject to tell people about. Remember what we're here for, to reflect God's light into a dark and dying world, to go into all the world and herald the gospel. This is what we're here for. And we can be good at it, and we can be effective at it. If we were not able to do this, God wouldn't have called us to. But he has. And we need to answer that call by being effective public speakers. Thank you.